Welcome to Grappling with the Gray. Let me get that account again. Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I would like to invite, actually I've already invited, I would like to welcome my guest for today. With me is Kimberly Davis, author, TEDx speaker, and founder of the Brave Leadership University, leading development programs worldwide around authentic leadership, purpose, presence, and influence. Diane Helbig is Chief Improvement Catalyzer at Helbig Enterprises, providing guidance and training to business owners and leaders around the world. And Annette Taylor is a researcher of evolutionary psychology and biology. Her website, Cave Dweller Club, offers guidance and insights on how we can better understand the way our own hardwiring influences unconscious bias and decision-making. Thank you, ladies, for being with me today.
Sure.
Thanks for having us.
And here is our topic. For years, I have been an avid fan of behavioral economics Professor Dan Ariely. I've often referenced his work on ethics and morals in my articles and discussions. However, he is now under fire, accused of falsifying his research for a paper about how to make people more honest, on which he collaborated with Harvard Business School professor Francesca Gino. Professor Ariely insists that he did not manipulate the data in developing his thesis. Hartford Insurance, which provided the data, asserts that he did just that. As the story unfolds, an investigative committee found Professor Gino guilty of misconduct. She has been placed on leave by Harvard and faces the unprecedented possibility of being stripped of tenure. She has responded by launching a lawsuit against the 3 researchers who exposed her manipulated data, as well as against the Dean of Harvard Business School, all of whom now face paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, even if they are exonerated. This sad story raises a variety of issues. Presumably, ethics scholars should demonstrate a higher standard of ethical behavior. So why does research indicate virtually no difference between ethicists and anyone else? If researchers are accused of misconduct, shouldn't they demonstrate the integrity of their research before their colleagues rather than resort to civil litigation? In general, haven't lawsuits and legal expenses become a weapon to coerce legitimate claimants to keep silent? Finally, should colleges reconsider the institution of tenure, considering how difficult it is to dislodge professors who are no longer worthy of their positions? Perhaps most important of all, we've begun to expect these kinds of stories and scandals. Can a society survive when we lose trust in our institutions and in one another? And what can we do, what can we do to reverse the trend? Lots to dive into. Where would you like to start?
Wow.
Yeah.
Right?
Like a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot there. You never shy away from the tough topics, Jonas, and I have to applaud you for that.
I have an idea.
Great.
Go ahead,
It
Annette.
might be a little bit around the side of where we're going, but Yonason, I hope you don't mind me asking, how did that make you feel when you discovered that this person that you thought they knew what they were talking about and were trustworthy, turns out they might not be? How was that for you?
Yeah, well, that's we often are disappointed in life. I still think there's a presumption of innocence that needs to be accorded, but so we'll put allegedly in front of all of our conversation. I had a professor, I had a teacher in high school, my favorite teacher of my entire life. He taught history, which I never particularly liked before. He turned me into a history addict. I quoted him in everything for years. And subsequently, when I went to start putting some of this information in writing and in speeches, I couldn't find the things that he taught us. and couldn't verify that what he taught us was true.
Oh my God.
And it has left me, I don't know how much therapy I need to get over this, but it has left me, very, very ambivalent about this beloved teacher that it seems was not terribly reliable.
Wow.
It does tend to make one a little bit cynical,
Yeah.
which is not healthy for us or for society.
No, and I think that honesty thing, I hate to come out of the gate with my little cave dweller thing, but we had accountability when we lived in small ancestral groups, and it's easier now to get away with being dishonest. And it's just so frustrating to watch. And your example, it's the first thing that popped into my head was like, this is a perfect example of, I wish people behaved in a way that they assumed that there were people watching them. And then they might not be so dishonest. But there's this opportunity, right, with like modern life that we can kind of get away with being dishonest.
But so it's so interesting, Annette, because I feel like we, over the past however many years, I mean, I know in my lifetime, and I'm sure it's been going on longer than that, we have leaders who don't hold themselves accountable. And there are endless examples of that. And I think part of the reason why we have gotten so far away from accountability is because I think where people operate from is, well, if I hold him accountable, then I'm going to have to hold myself accountable, and other people are going to hold me accountable. And I don't want to be held to that standard. So no. And then you see it where they don't, I mean, you can see it like with Congress. Okay, they don't pay their taxes. Not all of them, some of them. Well, if you worked for the IRS and you didn't pay and you made a mistake on your taxes, you'd be fired. Like there's no tolerance, but there's tolerance if you're a leader who is actually responsible on some level for the laws so they all just sort of do, oh yeah, you didn't understand, you didn't, I mean, there's so many examples of that. And those are the people everyone is seeing because they're the leader, right?
And you have this like researcher that like has clout and power and tenure, and is it as simple as that they're taking advantage of that? Sorry, Kimberly, go ahead.
I don't know.
Well, I think we're quick to jump on the presumption of guilt, and there's also, if we have to examine intent too. So I had a friend recently who leads a large team, and she went out on vacation, and her boss was put in charge of her team in her absence. And they had to submit, during her absence, they had to submit this big data set. And she came back and she asked her team, this is correct. Yes, you would bet my daughter's college fund on the fact that this is correct. Yes. Turned out that there were mistakes in the data set, and after they submitted it, and it caused a lot of havoc. And my friend, even though her boss was in charge of her team at the time, ended up taking the fall for it. Now, did she intend to falsify data? Did they intend to falsify data? No, there were mistakes that were made. When you look at university research, it's undergraduates and graduate students that are doing 99% of the heavy lifting, and the writer comes in and puts their name on it and goes, yes. And I strongly suspect that there was no malicious intent, that they held the research, the people that did the research, which were really the students, not really Dan, not really Francesca, it was really the students. They just put their name on it, that they held them held them at their word, and human beings are fallible. and mistakes are made. And we are so quick in this society to vilify people and assume that they meant something, that there was something underneath it, that they were trying to get rich, that they wanted, you know, whatever that intent that we make assumptions about. But if you did get to the root of it, it's one human mistake compounded with another human mistake, compounded by another human mistake, that turns into a big mess of yuck. Now, are there people that do things maliciously? Absolutely. There's lots of evidence for that. But in this instance, I'm not sure that's the case. I don't know. I mean, I don't think any of us know. But when Dan and Francesca say, we did not do this, I think they really may not have expected that to be the case. Now, were they responsible for the data set? Absolutely. But I don't know that they intended to do something that was wrong.
No,
So-
we had an episode post just today from a couple of weeks ago where we talked about the difference between mistakes, incompetence, and negligence.
Yes.
And yes, there are always going to be honest mistakes. When does it slide into incompetence that we simply weren't doing what we were supposed to be doing? And when does it go from there into
Right.
negligence?
Right.
And
And
we
I don't
really-
disagree that it's likely there was definitely negligence involved. And I think, you know, that when we get to the tenure conversation, and when you get to a guy that's published X number of books, who's got the publisher is expecting their next book right on the heels of the one you're getting out the door, I think it's easy to probably cut corners and move into that negligent space. And at the same time, nobody died in this situation. You know, nobody, the people that might lose their careers are the people that cause the problems. But this isn't a situation where people are getting injured. It's more of an intellectual breach, I think.
But is it a breach? So I have a question, because I was reading this and I was thinking to myself, isn't there something about data can be interpreted
Yes.
in, you know,
Yes.
various ways? So was it really falsifying the data? Could it have just been an interpretation of the data?
Well, and I think we can create data to serve the purpose we want it to serve. You know,
Right.
we
Isn't that
find
what
the
they
right
say people
data to
do?
prove our
Right.
point.
Yeah, the accusation here is that the data was actually misrepresented.
Manipulated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So again,
Well,
whether it was or it is not is still an open question.
And
But
misrepresented almost, and I know something about research. I have done one of my very own research projects, but I'm no expert. A lot of times it's what they leave out that
Oh.
strengthens
Mhm.
their case.
Argument.
So it's
Yeah.
possible that someone went back in later and was like, hey, there's all this other stuff that you didn't mention. And if you had included it, your theory would have not been proven or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'll just say that.
Can I switch over to the tenure question
yeah, please.
quickly? Okay, so it is my opinion that tenure should never have existed. I think tenure needs to go away. I think that people should be rewarded not for the length of time that they sit in a chair, but for the value that they bring to their position. So I think professors should be rewarded for educating or teaching their students how to be critical thinkers, or, you know, the thing that really matter, that should really matter when you're in college, especially someplace like Harvard. I mean, this tenure, it's just, I think it has caused problems that it really doesn't need to. That's
So it's sort of, it minimizes accountability.
yeah.
Once I have tenure, now I can sit back, I can coast. Not that every professor with tenure does that, but I don't have to, you know, I don't have to earn my keep necessarily. I'm safeguarded against that. So yeah.
right?
Well, when you look at the history of tenure, they started tenure to create freedom, so faculty members wouldn't fall into political persecution. So they could teach a lot of different ideas, and but it's so interesting because if you look at what's happening in Florida, they've changed the laws around tenure. So the governor DeSantis put a new law in place where tenured faculty are now reviewed every 5 years, and they can lose tenure in a heartbeat. So tenure doesn't really mean anything any longer in Florida. But what's interesting about that is it is political persecution if they teach ideas that go against
Belief systems.
so the faculty are being there's retribution for that.
Right.
And so
point.
the idea behind tenure of allowing faculty to be able to express a lot of different ideas to help students become critical thinkers is really great. But the practice does exactly what you're talking about. It limits accountability, it encourages complacency. A lot of problems come out of that. I think the system itself is broken. We need to find a new system that allows the freedom for expression and without political retribution, but doesn't give lifetime appointments, similar to our Supreme Court. Lifetime appointments are problematic.
Yeah,
I was thinking about the Supreme Court. Oh, I'm sorry, Allison.
No, go ahead, Diane.
Well, I was thinking about the Supreme Court with this whole thing because I was thinking to myself, maybe cases like this should be reviewed by the court, and the court decides whether it has merit to, the defamation suit, whether it has merit to actually go in front of the court system, just like the Supreme Court gets to decide whether they're going to hear cases.
I think that's normal. I think a case can be thrown out, and it varies from state to state. And Jonasson sent us an article explaining the SLAP stuff. I'm going to say it just so everyone knows: strategic lawsuit against public participation. And states vary in their protections of that. So if this case were maybe brought in a state that had stronger protections, I don't think it would have been heard. I think it would have been thrown out.
I do too.
It just so happens that Massachusetts doesn't have the stronger protections. And it seems interesting to me that other states don't kind of pay attention to what different states are doing to try and maybe get ahead of certain things. Like, why does this state have this law? Well, it does this, that's good, and this is bad. And so I feel bad for researchers in Massachusetts now, and maybe their people will come up with a stronger, I don't know. It's just so interesting when you have like 50 different ways of doing stuff, All
right, but you also get into this tightrope walk that on the one hand, if there aren't enough protections, then you can have these frivolous lawsuits that are used to bully people. If the protections are too strong, then you're diminishing accountability again. And it kind of goes to your point, Kimberly, that teachers can exploit tenure to turn their professorships into a soapbox for advancing radical political ideas.
Right.
But if they're not protected, then they can become the victims of those same politics.
Yeah.
So there has to be a kind of intrinsic trust in the system. We're going to trust each other to play fair, even when we disagree. And I think that's something that we're not seeing a whole lot of anymore.
Well, I want to get back to the thing about the lawsuits, though, because I hear y'all saying frivolous lawsuits. I don't know. We don't know for sure that her lawsuit is frivolous. I mean, when you look at academia, if someone says that what you did, that you falsified your research, and you don't know that you did, right? So you don't know that you did. So perhaps there were mistakes. We're talking about negligence, that perhaps that's true, but you're unaware of that. In academia, if you breathe falsified research, you're vilified and you're nothing. You have lost all credibility in your career for good. Now, if she did not do this, and in academia, when they vilify, I mean, they take you down. And if she did not do this, what are the repercussions for, because we find this a lot where we are taking people down over things that maybe we shouldn't be vilifying. We shouldn't be vilifying them for. You know, they're human mistakes. If we make it okay for people to say, wow, you know, that was a mistake, but we don't make it okay for people to own up to their mistakes. We take them down so fast that there is no room for people to say, yeah, I blew it. And there is not a person on this planet who did not blow it, who has not blown it. There is, we have all done it. And, but we make it as a society not permissible for us to own up to our own humanity. And I think that's a problem too.
Totally a problem. And it speaks to the in-group, out-group thing. Like,
yes,
if you're in academia and you make academia look bad, then you're out of academia. Like, that is the classic.
You're kicked out of the tribe.
Yes, seriously, it's exactly that. And not only that, within academia, let's say, for an example, I call it a status market, where you're vying for attention or resources or funding, or so you kind of get in a bubble. And so she's actually maybe been vilified in her status market, in her bubble, and she's panicking, and she's going outside her status market, which would mean now she's taking it to the court. And maybe she feels like she didn't do anything wrong and her only repercussion is suing. But when you're sitting outside that status market, you're like, what is her problem? You know, like, she's over, to me, I was like, you're overreacting, lady. Like, it's just so different if you're inside a group or outside a group. I don't know. It's very emotionally like charged, I think.
It's a really important point in it because, and again, I don't know how it works. There should be some system for her to defend herself.
Right.
And maybe there is.
Maybe there is.
But if there's not, then that is encouraging her to go outside the system and hit the nuclear button.
Yep.
So you can
That's exactly
walk
right.
the
That's
negligence
exactly right.
back into the system itself, even if perhaps there is a legitimacy to the claim against her.
That's what I kept wondering, because, you know, Kimberly, what you were saying about it's oftentimes the students who are doing these things, you would think that everybody knows that. And so they would have some sort of system internally where, you know, Francesca wouldn't feel like she was being persecuted, right? That if this panel had found that the data was incorrect, and so did the dean, whatever, they would all sit down and say, okay, how, you know, using curiosity, could this have happened? Let's talk about what happened here. Let's talk about what we do about it.
Yep.
But there's no room for that. There is no room for that conversation.
Yeah, it feels like it. Yeah.
But there might be on the campus, and she's not taking advantage of it. I mean, we don't know that there isn't room for that.
Right.
I don't know. I'm a little skeptical about that there's a safe place to actually have that conversation. I kind of
need a new leader if there isn't.
Right.
Yes. And that goes back to your point from the very beginning, Diane. It's all about the failure of leadership that we have on so many fronts.
Right.
Well, you remind me of some of the phrases that we hear, you know, mistakes were made. By whom? I take responsibility. And what does that look like?
It's scary.
You know, the words are very nice and comforting, but it just becomes a smokescreen.
Well, words are very, you know, I always say words matter, the words that you use. And I listen to the way people say things. And I will say to my husband, you know, that guy is skirting the truth. Listen to the words that he's using. He's being very specific about the way he's saying that.
And at the same time, Diane, this guy did not write his own words. His PR person wrote the words. Like, nobody is representative of themselves anymore. And so they're spinning it. What's the best way to spin it? And he's got reading off a teleprompter, something that somebody else wrote. But
to benefit him
so
specifically.
Ludicrous.
It is, because this person is down to his own survival. Whereas the job of a researcher in my head is you want to discover things for the group. like you want to help the group. When you get
Right.
persecuted, then you get, stuck in your, I have to survive. I'm going to do what I need to
Right.
do. And you just, I just want to pick people up and just calm them down and like
Well,
have
and
them
and,
start
and
thinking.
the truth is that our society, like the society in the United States, is so much about cover your backside,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Individualistic. Yep.
it's all
Yeah.
about liability, liability, liability,
Yeah.
liability. And so Harvard's looking out for themselves, and then she entrenches to herself, and
Yep.
it's because our culture has been so much about liability protection that it's ridiculous. It's
And
really
that is a signal of a lack of trust. Like,
right. Nobody trusts
Absolutely.
anybody
no,
anymore.
courts are
Absolutely.
win-lose.
Right.
Courts are win-lose. That's like the nuclear button, like you said, Jonathan.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
win-win. Like go to mediation. There's got to be some middle ground there, please.
Yeah,
Yeah. The collective. Right.
Sure. It's a little off topic, but there's a case story here in Missouri a couple of months ago. A small town mayor at a city meeting talking about garbage collection, and the contracts there. He said, well, we didn't want to Jew them down.
Whoops.
And
Out loud. What?
yeah, which for anyone who doesn't know is a
Horrible.
slur for being cheap and trying to get the price down. Well, I followed this story. This is a little rural town
Oh.
where nobody there had probably ever met a Jew.
Right.
And the way most of us used to say gypped without thinking at all about what it meant or where it came from. We didn't mean any harm. We just didn't know better.
Right.
And the mayor he was informed. He gave what I felt was a sincere apology.
Yeah.
And
good.
he explained himself,
Yeah.
as opposed to many of these apologies, like you said, the boilerplate written for me by the PR department
Right.
and read off the teleprompter. We are becoming trained not to believe anybody.
Yeah, it's so true.
Right.
And to be angry at people. There's a gal here on our news station who years ago, I don't even want to say what she said, but she's one of the sweetest, possibly not the brightest, I'm sorry, but she's lovely, but it was totally innocent. She had no idea what she had said. She said it on the news. I mean, it was sort of, it wasn't like she was at a party, right? And people went at her instantly, but she went on the news and she apologized. She was crying. She apologized. Her fellow anchor person sat right there with her and said, I've known her forever. I know this requires education. We need to be educating ourselves and each other on, sensitivities and all these, and thank God, and it went away. It could have
goodness.
ruined her career.
Well,
Could
people
have.
forgave
It could
her
have.
because they felt it was authentic. So
Which is the way it should be, and it
Right.
probably was authentic.
Yeah,
but
it
this
was.
third party stuff is
They made
like, ugh.
space for her humanity. I mean, for her to
Right.
come on screen and own it in that way, in such a public way, and share how her emotion and the real emotion. I mean, I think this is the problem: is we all share this planet. We human beings share this planet, and there's no room for humanity. I mean, it's amazing to me.
It is amazing.
And there's not one of us that is perfect.
Right.
If you look at some of our greatest leaders, Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., JFK, they've all made huge mistakes.
King David,
right?
We can go back pretty far and find that.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yep. I in somewhat, and this is kind of a cop out, but I somewhat blame the internet because there's so many opportunities to perfect yourself. Like on YouTube, like you're advertising something and it's like the 10th or 11th take that they use, and you start thinking that life should look like that. Life is not take after take after take. It's like first take and that's it.
And some of these cancel cultural stories where somebody
same.
said something 5 years ago or 15 years ago. Okay, call them out,
Learn?
give them a chance to
Right.
recant.
Yes.
But this idea of no, you said it, that's you. And we refuse to let you disassociate yourself from it.
Yep.
But
There's no
don't we
motivation
refuse to
to
let
do it.
them because it serves our
Our agenda.
political agenda? I
Yeah,
mean,
whatever our
honestly,
agenda is.
because then when someone on our side does it, we defend them to the hilt.
Well, yeah,
That's absolutely right.
that kind of double standard, that's a whole episode in itself.
It is. And this makes me so happy I grew up in the 80s. Like,
No kidding.
yay,
Oh,
no
me
internet,
too.
no
No.
social
Right?
media.
My
Because the internet has a
18-year-old
lot to do
self
with it.
does
We
not need to
know
be
so
on the
much
internet.
more than we knew. Like when I
Well,
I
and
grew
people
up.
can
And some
also
of it's even
comment
true.
in an instant without seeing any retribution. Like,
Yep.
they don't see that they
Anonymity
hurt
again.
someone. They just bleh,
Yeah.
without thinking.
No accountability. Yep.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, we have a couple of comments. Mark says that you can find all sorts of terrifying stuff that appears in academic journals. They're actually, gosh, I've got to look this up. It was both hilarious and horrifying. There were a couple of fellows that they started writing academic pieces in educationalese, literally making up nonsense,
Ooh.
and got a lot of them published.
Were they trying to
and
prove a
peer, and
point?
peer reviewed.
And peer reviewed.
And then after a while went public
And
and
said
it
this
was-
isn't real.
yeah, they
Yeah, I
said,
remember that. That was disturbing.
yeah.
It's the onion of the academic
Right.
world.
And of course, they were vilified for falsifying their their reports.
For proving
It's
that
just
it can
ridiculous.
happen. Yeah, that's very
And we have
ironic.
totally lost our sense of humor. Like
We really
take
have.
everything
I know.
so seriously.
I know, right? So true.
Well, actually, I just had an article on this this past week that I think there's what is humor? Humor is the juxtaposition of incongruous ideas.
Oh.
Two things that don't belong together create a humorous response.
Hmm.
Well, what is rational discourse? It's entertaining two different ideas that may not fit together nicely.
Hmm.
So maybe
Interesting.
it's natural that as we lose the capacity for one, we lose the capacity for the other.
Oh.
That is so interesting. Oh, there's a book in that,
Wow.
Jonathan.
Yeah, there is.
There's your next book.
I think it was a catchy title.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
In other words,
That's
the ability to
unfortunate.
laugh is life is ironic. There are contradictions, there are paradoxes, there are incongruities, and either you go with it, or you get all worked up about it, or you just try to erase them because I don't want to deal with it. And then you're back in that
Right.
binary thinking that we
Right.
were talking about.
Yeah. And
Yes.
if we were all calmer, we could think it's funny. But we have to take everything seriously when we're already on edge,
Yeah, right.
Tough.
Well, the vibration is so high.
Oh my gosh.
It's crazy.
Martin says that Alan Sokol was the first to prank academic journals. Recently, it was these three guys that he brings a article in the Atlantic,
Oh.
which I'm not going to try to tell you what the URL is, but maybe you're probably.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens in terms of Dan Ariely's publishers and whether he has other books that come out and what happens there in the fallout from that.
Yeah, well, even in Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which is Pulitzer Prize winner, or Nobel Prize winner, and a brilliant piece of work, but apparently he came out subsequently and acknowledged that he had fallen victim to some of the same biases that he exposes in the book.
Right. Because he's human.
Right.
But he
Because
admitted
he's
it.
human.
That's
But
amazing.
yeah, he admitted it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Great.
Yeah.
And brave.
yeah, right. I
Well, and
predict.
that's try writing a book called Brave Leadership and then being scared of things. Like, crud, I'm like, everyone's going to expect this person that's like, that's not who I am, I guess, so.
Well, now you have to be, right?
But that's the expectation, right?
Yeah.
Wow,
There's
that's risky.
you must have it all dialed in. No.
That's a really
Still
good
working on
point.
it.
And, maybe we can sort of wrap up with that, but the teenagers in particular are so sensitive to hypocrisy, or claim they are.
Or
And-
claiming-
Yeah. And what you're describing is I don't have to be perfect in any field to be an advocate for that field. I don't have to have mastered
Right.
a virtue
Absolutely.
to be an advocate for that virtue. That's the idea of being aspirational. I
Yes.
can't tell you
Well,
I've
and I
never
don't
done
know about
anything
you,
unethical in
Jonathan,
my
but I think
life.
Yeah.
yeah, I look at my work around bravery, and it's because I hunger to be a more brave human being. And so I'm
Right.
passionate about this conversation. And it's in the fact that I know that there are things I can grow in that make me excited about this. And I would think, that's true for someone who's into ethics as well. You hunger to be the most ethical person you can be. So you delve into this conversation in rich, meaningful ways, but that doesn't make us immune from being human beings.
Right.
And
Right.
pretending that you are that ethical or brave person isn't authentic. Like, it gets all tangled.
Right.
It
'Cause
does. Well, and there's some
bravery-
days I can bring it and some days no.
But isn't bravery being able to own where you are on the
Yes.
spectrum, right?
Yes.
And
yes,
at any
absolutely.
point in time, sometimes I'm a
Yes.
very brave leader, sometimes I am not.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
so,
All
It's-
relative.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really what is
And I just hope that both of these professors who've dedicated their lives to doing very meaningful work
Yeah.
don't stop doing meaningful work.
Well, I predict that they might have a lull. But one thing that's very interesting to me about Americans is after a point in time, we forgive. I don't know if we forget, but we forgive. And people get to come back and go back into their world. So, you see that, like when that Me Too movement was going on, there were all sorts of people who lost their jobs. They're back. Some of them, I mean, they had to be punished, right? So they were punished, they were shunned. But after, I don't know, things settled down or whatever it was, a lot of them are back to doing exactly what they were doing before. So
I don't know. Matt Lauer probably is never going to show his face.
well,
on
I
TV.
know, but oh my God. I mean, there are degrees.
we can't talk about Bill Cosby anymore, that's for sure. And we're still trying to wrap our heads around Thomas Jefferson. So
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yup.
Good point.
it's complicated, and well, that's why we're here. Well, thanks, ladies. This has been a really compelling conversation. Thank you, Kimberly Davis, Diane Helbig, and Annette Taylor. Look forward to the next time we can be together. For those of you who are watching and listening, if you have a topic you'd like us to take up, tongue-tied today, please go to my website, ethicsninja.com. Use the contact information, submit your idea. If it's compelling, we definitely will take it up. And until then, we look forward to next time and encourage you to continue grappling with the gray.